And our fourth main topic today gets submitted to us by Chief Leef, who writes, "Hey, John. So, Tom Holland just said on Entertainment Weekly that No Way Home will be the end of a franchise and that it would be the end of the Homecoming trilogy. He also said that if they ever dive into these characters again, that they will be very different versions. What are your overall thoughts, and what does this suggest to you about Holland's Spider-Man's future in the MCU?" All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, Chief. Appreciate that, man. And listen, if there's any poster child on Marvel's executive wing's office's walls about people with loose lips, Tom Holland is the poster child for that. Like he's the picture they put up on their wall saying, if you see this kid talking, shut him up. Like that's traditionally been Tom Holland. He admits that himself too. But he did just make a couple of really interesting comments. Now, let me say for context, I have thoroughly enjoyed John Watts's Spider-Man films. Homecoming, Far From Home, I have both found delightful films, especially Homecoming. I really enjoyed Far From Home as well. Insanely excited for the upcoming Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, Rob, you know I have been saying that I kind of believe, I don't know that this is true. This is just me as a fan speculating. Simple, could be right, could be wrong. But I've been speculating lately that Spider-Man No Way Home is going to be one big setup for the exit of Spider-Man out of the MCU.
Yes, you have.
And I've kind of believed, Rob, ever since we went back to D23, the last D23 that happened back in 2017, 2018, when Sony and Marvel had said they ended their deal and they were done. But then a few days later, they said they announced a new like 3 or 4 film deal. And at that time, I said, you know what? I bet the reason they re-upped such a limited deal was just because, you know what? Let's set up. Oh, look at that.
I have him wearing Stark's glasses. You know,
a little No Way or Far From Home accent in there. Oh, I love that he's got the drone above him there too.
Yeah, this is a great figure.
That is an awesome figure. I love that. But you know, back when they announced the re-upping of the deal, I said, I got a feeling they're doing it so they can properly set up a proper exit. Because Rob, the way it was going to be was very abrupt. It was like all of a sudden there's Spider-Man movies and all of a sudden our deal's done. No more Spider-Man. It's like, what? We're just going to end with him the way that seems weird. So let's take a look specifically at what Tom Holland said, because there's going to be obviously, Rob, a big game of interpretation here.
Yep.
Some people are going to interpret this differently. So let's see what he said. Tom Holland said the following: "We were all treating this film as the end of a franchise, let's say. I think if we were lucky enough, let me say this again. I think if we were lucky enough to dive into these characters again, you'd be seeing very different versions. It would no longer be the Homecoming trilogy. We would give it some time and try to build something different and tonally change the films. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. But we were definitely treating No Way Home like it was coming to an end, and it felt like it." Let me read that first part again. We were all treating No Way Home as the end of a franchise. We were all treating this like it was the end. It's all coming to an end, and it felt like it was. Now, I think there are a couple of possibilities here. Let me start with the one that isn't the one I actually think it is, but would make sense. Possibility number one here is that he is implying a major shift in the universe and in the Spider-Man character himself, but still in the MCU. He could just be implying that, listen, there is a major fundamental shift coming to Spider-Man and his associated characters, that if we do more Spider-Man movies in the MCU, we're all going to be like really different. That's definitely a possibility. That is one interpretation, and that's a valid interpretation. It could be that. But Rob, the one I believe makes more sense, because what he said kind of coincides to what I've been speculating, is it really does sound to me like he's saying, with trying not to say too much, is that this is it. This is the end of Spider-Man in the MCU. And if you see us again, It'll be very different, i.e. Sonyverse. It's going to be in the Sonyverse. Now, again, that's just an interpretation. Let me say that up front. That is just an interpretation. The other interpretation that it's going to be him staying in the MCU and all that kind of stuff is valid too. But Rob, I've been saying for a while, I think there's a lot of, circumstantial evidence. Let's call it that. Let's call it circumstantial evidence that points to that Sony is getting ready to bring Spider-Man back home, to bring him back into Sony's verse. And that's where he's going to live from now on. And I think there's been anecdotal evidence that Marvel has been preparing the way for it to be without Spider-Man. So I look at his words, Rob, and I feel a little bit more certain that we are talking about the end of Spider-Man in the MCU and him moving over to the Sonyverse thing. I mean, I don't know that. That's not a fact. I still could be totally wrong about that. We're all just guessing. But I see those words, and that's how I interpret it, Rob. Rob, these are some significant words. You hear them coming out of Tom Holland's mouth. What's your interpretation of the situation?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I have to agree with you 100%. I mean, Sony wants this franchise to be theirs. They're building up their own universe. I mean, now with Morbius, they're doing Kraven the Hunter. They've got Venom and Carnage, or maybe not Carnage. Who knows where that's going to go? But the universe we know from the end of Venom, Let There Be Carnage, has shifted somehow, that now Tom Holland's in that universe. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Sony takes the next, they're doing a whole new Spider-Man trilogy under their own auspices. Obviously, we're dealing with the quantum realm in Marvel. The multiverse is crazy right now. Who knows where that's going to go? So I think if Spider-Man moved over to Sony and they did 3 movies on their own, another Spider-Man trilogy, nobody would miss Spider-Man in the MCU because there's so many shenanigans happening on so many different levels. We've got new characters to introduce in Marvel. And I don't think anybody would miss Spider-Man for a while. And that's what they've done. Marvel has made sure that they're going to be able to get Spider-Man, shunt him over somewhere else. And because they're going to make their own Spider-Man movies, it's not like Tom Holland's going to be missed, because we're going to get a whole Spider-Verse of stuff going on at Sony like it's has been. And I think that's exactly what they're doing. And I think everyone will be happy. No one's going to miss Spider-Man. Did you miss Spider-Man and Shang-Chi, John?
Oddly enough, I did not. No, I did not.
And I'm sure that in the Eternals, I probably am not going to miss him. And in Thor: Love and Thunder, probably not going to miss Spider-Man. Quantum Mania, Doctor Strange, probably. Well, we're going to see Doctor Strange and Spider-Man together, but we probably won't miss Spider-Man in Multiverse of Madness unless he's in that too. Who knows? But I think that they could get away. The Marvel Cinematic Universe will get away just nicely without Spider-Man for a long while, especially if Sony makes their own Spider-Man movies, because they'll be dealing with their own stuff.
There's an inconvenient truth that a lot of MCU fans don't want to accept. And I've been saying this for a long time. Rob, in negotiations, like the ones you get between Sony and Marvel, for there to be hard negotiations, both sides have to have something the other side wants. And both sides have to come to the table with some degree of leverage, right? Here's the reality with Marvel in the MCU, though. Marvel doesn't need Spider-Man.
Right.
People hate it when I say that. I'm not saying Spider-Man isn't great in the MCU. I'm not saying the Spider-Man movies haven't been thoroughly entertaining. I've enjoyed them a lot. But the reality is, Rob, the MCU doesn't need Spider-Man. They've got Shang-Chi making money, for heaven's sakes. They've got Fantastic Four coming. They've got 1,000 new characters in the Mutants coming. They've got Thor, and they've got all these. They got Doctor Strange, and they've got hundreds of characters of a roster there. The reality is MCU enjoy having Spider-Man? Of course it does. Does the MCU need Spider-Man? It didn't need Spider-Man before he showed up.
For 8 years, it didn't need him.
Didn't need him. And so the reality is, when you're talking about these negotiations, it's not like Marvel is sitting at the table going, we've got to have Spider-Man. I mean, everything is lost. We're lost. If we lose Spider-Man, Marvel simply doesn't come to the table with that need. And so if Sony comes to the table demanding the world, which they have every right to demand because they've got the rights to the character, and they would love to have him over there. The reality is there's only so much Marvel would be willing to do because they don't need him. It's not like they're saying, the concept of superpowers. Let's say Sony had the rights to the very concept of superpowers. Well, Marvel needs that. Marvel has to have that. They can't exist without it. It's not true of Spider-Man. Rob, it's not true of any single character in the MCU right now. They've grown so big. Thor isn't irreplaceable in there now. Doctor Strange isn't irreplaceable in there right now, other than what their current story plans are, obviously. But that, and the reality is Sony. What's the motivation now for Sony? Sony's like, okay, we've now put out 2 Sonyverse Spider-Man movies that have done very well for us. We've got Morbius coming, which is getting a lot of traction. And we've made better Spider-Man movies than Marvel ever has. So, yeah. So, it just seems like that. But Rob, again, you never know what can be on the table. You always say it's not about what you deserve, it's about what you negotiate. And if Marvel and Sony can find something that each of them both mutually really need and want, they can make another deal and extend this. And that, I'm not saying that's not still on the table. It is. I just personally think where we're at right now, it's all heading to Tom Holland leaving the MCU and going over to the Sonyverse. And you know,
I believe that 100%.
And Rob, I don't know what you think about this, but you know, a lot of people, like I see some people in the live chat going, but John, what about Venom? Well, I said after I saw Venom that whole ending was to set up, also help the setup of Spider-Man coming back over. Venom ain't going over to the MCU to stay in the MCU. I think it's going to be a part of bringing Spider-Man back into the Sonyverse. And then once he does, there's no way home. That's my, I don't know. How would you address that, Rob, with the Venom situation?
That's it. You just, there it is right there. And that's why the movie's called that. And I think at the end of the film, Spider-Man is going to be in a different universe, you know, or maybe there's a little tie into Multiverse of Madness or something, or maybe Spider-Man is lost, and you know, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I don't think that's a bad thing, John. You know, I think that for the MCU, they're rebuilding. They're basically back to where they were when they were making Iron Man 2 and Incredible Hulk over at Universal. They're rebuilding their universe. They gave us Shang-Chi was a hit. People liked it. And they got Eternals coming. They've got other new characters that they're going to introduce. They got the God Butcher coming. Come on now.
Ooh, gore.
You know? And I'm just like, what's not to love? Fantastic Four will be coming. X-Men, I'm sure, will be coming. People won't even remember Spider-Man's gone because Sony's going to make Spider-Man movies. So it's not like we're not going to see him. And you think that if they want to, that Sony couldn't be like, hey, man, can you throw in a MCU character for us? Cameo, whatever. It will happen just like Spider-Man kind of turned up at the end of Venom.
Well, again, I think there's still other things are still on the table. Rob, I'm not saying that's the only possibility. I don't think you're saying that's the only. Absolutely, no. There are other things that can happen. 100% there are other things that could happen. But I am still personally leaning that way. And I think all of this, including including Tom Holland's new comment, I think that all just feeds into the theory that we are seeing the departure of Spider-Man out of the MCU. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. Question is for you guys. What do you make of Tom Holland's statement? He says, we filmed this as the end of the franchise, and it feels like this is the end of it. I mean, that's what he said. How do you interpret that? What do you guys think it means? It could mean any of the 2 or 3 things that we proposed. It could mean 100 other different things that maybe you guys thought of that we haven't thought of. Wherever you guys are at on this, it's fun to speculate about, isn't it? Wherever you guys are on this, jump down into the comment section below and leave your thoughts there.